Riding a motorcycle with a passenger changes everything, and most experienced riders feel it for the first time in the parking lot, not on the highway. You roll forward to test the brake before you pull into traffic, and the bike moves differently. The nose dips differently. The weight settles towards the back in a way it never does when you're solo. There's a person behind you who has no idea what's coming, and your muscle memory is already out of calibration. Most riders assume they'll adapt fast. They have the miles, they know their bike, but here's what your instincts can't account for yet. Your braking distance just changed. Not by a little. A passenger adds real stopping distance. In practical riding conditions, that can mean dozens of extra feet at highway speeds. The bike your reflexes are calibrated for doesn't exist anymore the second someone climbs on the back. We're going to cover what actually changes, how to prepare your passenger before you pull out, and the legal reality that trips up most riders in New York when a passenger gets hurt. By the end of this, you'll know what to do before the ride that most two-up riders skip entirely. Let's start with the physics. Your motorcycle was balanced and tuned for one rider. Suspension preload, front to rear, weight distribution, braking bias, all of it was set at the factory for your weight and your weight alone. The second you add a passenger, every one of those calibrations shifts. The center of gravity moves backward and higher at the same time. Higher center of gravity means the bike is less stable in a lean. More weight towards the rear means the front wheel carries less load. And a front wheel carrying less load is a front wheel with a reduced braking effectiveness at the exact moment you're most depending upon it. Here's the number that matters. At 60 miles per hour on a dry road, a typical street bike could take somewhere in the range of 150 feet to stop under full braking. Add a passenger, and that same stop can take meaningfully more, depending upon their weight, road conditions, whether your suspension is set up for the load, and your technique. That extra distance is real, and your muscle memory hasn't accounted for it yet. In traffic, that extra distance is the gap between stopping in time and not. If your bike has adjustable rear preload, set it for the added weight before you ride. A motorcycle running undersprung for its actual load handles poorly through turns and brakes poorly under hard stops. The adjustment takes 10 minutes. Skip it, and you're fighting the bike's geometry for the entire ride. The tire loading changes too. With more weight on the rear, the contact patch is under greater load through cornering. Your margins in tight turns at speed are narrower than they are solo. The bike will still corner. It will just require more precision to do it cleanly. Before you leave the parking lot, there's a conversation you need to have. Your passenger has no feedback from the road. It don't feel what you feel through the handlebars. It can't read traffic the way you can from behind the windscreen. They're reacting entirely to what you do, not to what's coming. That gap is dangerous, and the way you close it is by setting expectations before the ride starts, not after something goes wrong. The basics of that conversation. Feet stay on the pegs the entire ride, including when you're stopped. Putting a foot down is your job and only your job. In corners, hold on. Follow the bike's lean. Don't push into the turn, and don't lean away from it. Their body position in a turn should track the bike's lean as naturally as possible. And the most important one is something scares them. Tell me by squeezing my waist. Don't grab my arms or shoulders in the middle of it. That last rule is the one that matters most. I've talked to riders who have had a passenger grab the forearms mid-corner. It happens fast, and there's no warning. You're in a lean, the bike is balanced on a specific line, and suddenly there are hands closing around your arm with real force. That's steering input you didn't apply at the worst possible moment. Most experienced riders recover from it, but some don't. Tell your passenger before you ride. That one instruction delivered clearly before you leave the parking lot changes the risk picture of the entire ride. In a hard stop, here's what happens. The bike pitches forward under braking. Your passenger feels themselves going forward, and their instinct is to reach for something to hold, usually you. The reflex is completely natural and completely wrong for what you need at that moment. Their hands on your arms in the middle of an emergency stop adds unpredictable steering input at the exact point when precise control matters most. In corners, the problem is different. A passenger who gets frightened mid-turn may lean upright away from the direction of the corner. On a motorcycle, the body position of the passenger affects the bike's center of gravity in the lean. An experienced rider can sometimes compensate. In a tight corner at road speed with a passenger moving the wrong way, sometimes there isn't room to compensate. This isn't a reflection of bad passenger. It's physics and instinct. The solution is preparation, short first rides, and deliberate route choices. Your first two-up ride is not the time for a canyon run. It's a neighborhood loop at low speed. Let your passenger get comfortable feeling the lean in a low-stakes environment before you put them in situations that demand precision. Here's my question for you riders. If you've ridden two-up before, you know what it feels like when a passenger is tense versus when they're relaxed. Drop it in the comments. What was the one thing that surprised you the most the first time you rode with somebody on the back? I read every one of them. The legal side of passenger riding. Under New York's vehicle and traffic law, your motorcycle must be designed to carry more than one person, and the passenger must ride on a properly attached seat. New York DMV guidance also requires passenger foot pegs or footrests. This isn't optional maintenance. A motorcycle that isn't properly equipped for a passenger but carries one anyway creates a liability problem if something goes wrong. A practical standard is simple. If your motorcycle isn't designed or configured to carry a passenger, don't carry one. Seat placement matters. Peg placement matters. And while New York's mandatory equipment requirements focus on the motorcycle's configuration rather than specifically what the passenger is wearing, the gear question is still real. A passenger in shorts and sandals who ends up with severe road rash is a clinical picture with legal consequences. A claims adjuster will look at what your passenger was wearing and use it as a contribution argument. You can't control every variable, but you can control whether your passenger is geared up before you leave. Here's what most riders don't know. Your passenger under New York law has the right to file a claim against you if they're injured in a crash, not just against the other driver, against you. If you ran a light that had already changed, if you're riding too fast for conditions, if your motorcycle wasn't properly equipped for a passenger, those are things that give your passenger legal standing against your insurance policy. Motorcycle coverage in New York covers a passenger's injuries, but the question of whether your coverage limits are adequate for a serious injury is one worth knowing the answer to before something happens, not after. The other side of this, equally important. If your passenger is injured because of another driver's negligence, they have a legal claim against that driver that stands completely on its own, independent of yours. Two people in the same crash, two separate legal claims, both running simultaneously. The injury picture that can come out of a passenger crash, especially head injuries and brain trauma, is something we'll cover in a separate video. I'll link it below. If you have questions about coverage or about what happens legally when a passenger is injured in New York, the contact information is in the description. That conversation is free. Riding with a passenger is a skill that takes time to develop, the same way solo riding did. Start in a controlled environment, communicate before every ride, and take your first two-up trips on routes you know well at speeds that give you margin to work with. For the legal side of motorcycle crashes in New York, the video linked below covers what to do in the first hours after a crash. Worth watching before you ever need it. Tell me about your first time riding two-up. What surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments.